His enemy halted again, facing him, and the shadow about it reached out like two vast wings. It raised the whip, and the thongs whined and cracked. Fire came from its nostrils, but Gandalf stood firm. You cannot pass, he said. The orc stood still, and a dead silence fell. I am a servant of the secret fire, wielder of the flame of Arnor. You cannot pass. The dark fire will not avail you, flame of Udun. Go back to the shadow. You cannot pass.
Welcome to the Wayward Wizards podcast. This week we're reading Book 2, Chapter 5, The Bridge of Khazad-dum, which is a banger.
Holy mackerel.
It's great. It's great. As you were reading the passage today, I forgot that we were doing a podcast. I was like getting all excited.
It makes me
excited.
It makes me emotional every time I read it. I don't think there's ever been a time that I've read this passage that I didn't cry.
It's so good, and I think it comes at a perfect time in the story where we like care for these characters. Certainly Gandalf, but we care for all of them, and we have some fear for them because we've grown to love them, and so then to have Gandalf, who's really been our leader up until this point, stand and face down this like horror from the depths, is incredibly affecting and surprising. I think, in context, I really don't think it's telegraphed. There are little bits and pieces where, this is a scary place to be. Like Moria is not a good place to go.
Yeah.
And there's some dread both on the part of Aragorn and other people in the company as well as Gandalf. But it's not really telegraphed that like, oh, Gandalf's going to his doom for sure because they're walking through Moria. So for this to be, for this chapter, this like short chapter to be placed here, it just works. It just really works. I think it's masterful.
The thing that always gets me is the way that the company refuses to leave him. Like he tells them to run multiple times and they don't.
Yeah. Especially Aragorn and Boromir, right?
Aragorn and Boromir, like standing right behind him. Like
it's awesome.
That it's just amazing. And this line, especially, like as I was just reading it, this line just like I almost had to stop reading to like collect myself.
Mm-hmm.
The others halted just within the doorway at the hall's end and turned.
You can't even. It's like you can't even do it.
I can't even get through it.
Right. Let me see if I can.
The others halted just within the doorway at the hall's end and turned, unable to leave their leader to face the enemy alone. It's just, I think it's one of the best moments in the whole book. I mean, it's almost cliche to say it's like my favorite scene in the whole book, but I think this is right up there.
Oh, absolutely. Hey, while we're talking about people standing with Gandalf, should we talk about some of the people standing with us
here man.
In the podcast?
Yeah, and that'll give me time to stop crying too.
Yeah, so there's a few folks from our lives, but also people who I guess have like become part of our lives now because we're doing this podcast, which is kind of like a trip to think about. And so I just wanted to shout out Valerie, who got in touch with us. Valerie told us that she is listening to the podcast while she has chemo treatments for cancer.
Yeah.
Which I read at my desk with my mouth like hanging open. And then I read it, and then I read her email again, and I started crying. And I was like, and I think I texted you, and you were like, "Well, I guess we better keep doing this.
Can't quit now.
Can't quit on Valerie. She's fighting cancer." So
Valerie,
Um,
you have kept us doing the podcast. I think both individually,
yeah,
because it's a daunting task to try to do the whole book, and it can be a little overwhelming to think about like how much more material we have to go through. But knowing that it was a source of comfort for you has been keeping us going.
yeah,
But also, I think it just speaks to the power of these stories and how they give us hope, and
absolutely.
they give us strength and courage to face hard things. And so we're just thankful that you're listening.
Yeah,
And
all credit to Tolkien. And thanks for getting in touch with us and letting us know you're listening. I also just want to shout out my friend Nick, who always has interesting things to say after he listens to the podcast, and then my buddy Chris, um, who started listening recently and is listening to the podcast while going on runs, using a Garmin app in his watch, which tracks where he is
in Middle Earth.
in Middle Earth, which is some real nerdy.
That is
That's like
so nerdy. I love it.
that's like peak nerd. I don't think he's listening or reading, the book at the same time, but I appreciate his attention. So anyway,
Yeah, I want to shout out my cool cousin-in-law Blake. Thanks for all the encouragement. And I think our very first listener, Christopher from my church. Um, I hope you're still listening, Chris. I haven't checked in with you in a while. If you hear this on the pod, shoot me a text. But I think you are our very first listener, so thank you. And
I
he's
love it.
he's reading a chapter of the book for the first time, and then listening to the pod after
Oh, is
to
that
like
right?
have the context. So is he's literally engaging with this text for the first time. He watched
Oh,
the
good for
movies
him.
like years ago, but
That's cool.
yeah. So thank you all.
Thanks for standing with us on the bridge.
Yeah.
We all face Balrogs in our lives, and not that the podcast is one of them, but
I was about to say, yeah, we enjoy the podcast.
yeah, but I think that at least for me, at least, this process and project has been not to get too personal, but has been a little bit of a salvation in certain ways, and so I appreciate that anyone's willing to come along the journey with us.
Yeah.
All right, should we jump into the chapter here now that we're done with all the sentimental
All the
nonsense?
sentimental stuff. Yeah, let's jump in. So it's been a while since you and I last talked. So let's like just kind of like place ourselves in space here.
Yeah.
So we've just found out that Balin is for sure dead, and they are standing next to Balin's tomb. What do you call it? What's the word for a tomb that's like above ground like that?
A
Where,
sepulcher.
yeah, they're standing next to the sepulcher of Balin, and I think like I think for me at least, Lord of the Rings is my favorite book, and so I go back to Lord of the Rings very often. I read The Hobbit a few times, but not nearly as many times as I read Lord of the Rings. But I think it's important to kind of just like mention that Balin was like a major character in The Hobbit.
Yeah. He's sort of like Bilbo's best buddy. Am I
Yeah,
wrong? Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah,
I mean next to Gandalf, right? Like
but
he's definitely one of the main guys.
he like kind of grows on Balin, and Balin has this affection for him, so much so that Balin travels back to the Shire to visit Bilbo, which like is not an easy journey by any means. So that just shows the level of affection. They did the whole journey there to the Lonely Mountain, and then Balin comes all the way back to the Shire, and then all the way back to the Lonely Mountain again. So he
Yeah.
does the whole journey like 3 times, just because he has so much affection for.
That's pretty cool. You know, characters who like fall in love with hobbits are or who already have affection for hobbits are like always the best.
Yeah,
They get like special whatever, they get special attention from Tolkien.
yeah, for sure.
Because there's something sort of like simple about hobbits, or there's like a magic to them, and so a character like Gandalf or like Balin who just like thinks like, man, these little guys are great.
Yeah. They're like a stand-in
So
for us. I mean, we all love
yeah,
hobbits. That's why.
exactly. I think that, so. Yeah, that's probably it.
I mean, that's basically how the chapter starts. And the narrator says, "The company of the ring stood silent beside the tomb of Balin. Frodo thought of Bilbo and his long friendship with the dwarf, and of Balin's visit to the Shire long ago." So this is exactly where Frodo's mind is going too.
Right. He knows all those stories.
Right.
Have they already found the book, or do they find it now? And then Gandalf, yeah, Gandalf starts to kind of translate what happened. How did they get to this place where Balin died? And I think dread starts to mount as he goes through what happened to the colony,
Right.
of the dwarves, because it foreshadows what's going to happen in this chapter.
Yeah.
Um, we know suddenly that there's a big, well, not only a lot of orcs around, but like also a big threat, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. There's something so Tolkienian about them finding like a book that
Yeah.
kind of explains exactly what happened to them.
Yeah, I
It's
love that.
kind of convenient, right?
Somebody wrote it all down. But this is a culture, even though, there are people in the Shire who are literate and people who are illiterate. It's still a world in which lore is really important.
Yeah.
And so like oral histories are important, but also like having these things written down to each race in the story is sort of central to their concept as like a culture
Yeah.
in some way,
Yeah.
which is interesting. So it's doesn't surprise me that the dwarves would, like, even though they're like under attack, also be writing down what happened.
Yeah, and they're like able to tell who wrote it down based on their handwriting.
Yeah, I love that.
Gimli's able to say that would be Ori's hand. He could write well and speedily, and often use the Elvish characters. I mean, these are people that Gimli knows really, really well.
Right.
So I don't think we should like. I think, and the other thing too is like Gandalf knew Balin really well. So this
Mhm.
isn't just like the Lord of Moria they're fighting. This
Like,
is
oh yeah, bummer.
yeah.
It's
I
like
mean, this is
it's like their
their
buddy.
friend. This
Yeah.
is their friend. I mean, like Gandalf has known Balin for decades. Gimli is the son of Glowin, who is like one of the 13 dwarves, just like Balin. And
Right.
we learn about Ori, we learn about Floey dying. These are all people that he knew really well.
Yeah. Almost like his a bunch of uncles that he had.
100%.
These are all like legendary dwarves too, because they were part of that company that, you know, regained the Lonely Mountain from Smaug.
Yeah, it took
So,
Smaug down. Yeah. I
right.
mean,
So
these aren't
they're all
just
like,
your
it's a bunch of heroes.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
It also, like, I don't know, one question that I've always had that I feel like this kind of answers is, how did they not know what happened to Moria? I think you mentioned last episode that it just shows that it's kind of like possible that, like, in dwarves' minds, it's not that weird for somebody just to go underground for 30 years and not come back up. It's not going to be out of character for them to become like so focused on digging up whatever they're digging up down there that they're gonna not peak up for a long time.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so I guess that kind of sets it up in a convincing way of like, oh yeah, I mean, it's not impossible that they wouldn't know that Moria had this happen to it. I mean, it's a vast. I mean, it takes multiple days to walk across, so it's not a small place. So it wouldn't be beyond the realm of possibility that they would just run into Balin and he's just like, oh, Gandalf, uh, son of Glowin, like, good to see you. Oh, you're
Yeah.
you're you're Frodo's heir. Oh, cool. We never met. Nice to meet you.
Yeah.
I'm
Right.
like that was possible that could have happened.
I think that's what Gimli was hoping for when they
Yeah,
entered Moria, and probably even through some of Moria, that, even though it seemed like to be a lot of it was in ruin, like maybe they would come to a place where, these dwarves had set something more alive up.
and it seems to be that was the case. Like, I mean, that happened for a time. For a time, their little colony was successful,
Right.
and so much so that they call Balin the Lord of Moria, which has an irony to it because, of course, he's not the Lord of Moria. I mean, he ultimately is killed,
Right.
and I mean, the real Lord of Moria now is the Balrog.
Yeah, that's right.
Um, which I think we should say too, if we haven't said already, the Balrog is like what they woke up in Khazad-dum that gave it the name Moria. Like Moria means black pit.
Yeah.
Like Moria is not what the dwarves called Khazad-dum.
Right.
It's what the elves called Khazad-dum after it was taken over by the Balrog.
Yeah.
And it has the same prefix Mor as like Mordor.
Mm-hmm.
Like Mordor means black land.
Mordor, Morgoth,
Morgoth,
Moria.
Moria. So it's a bad name. It's not a name that you want.
Mm-hmm.
It's not what the dwarves called it themselves. So um, the Balrog was woken up by the dwarves because they were digging for Mithril, and they didn't know that it was there. It had been there so long. Like a Balrog is a powerful spiritual being who aligned itself with Morgoth,
Yeah.
who is the big bad guy, Sauron's boss. So the Balrog does not work for Sauron,
Mm-mm.
as we understand it. Would you agree with that?
I would say, yeah, Balrog is more of a free agent. Um, but I would, I guess I would characterize, the goals of a Balrog and the goals of Sauron as somehow they would come into alignment,
Yeah.
more readily than Gandalf and a Balrog, for instance.
Right.
But
But the Balrog hasn't been like sent by Sauron to find the ring or anything like that.
no, the Balrog was sort of slinked away from a defeat when
Yeah,
Morgoth was defeated,
exactly.
and went and slept under the mountain until it was disturbed by Durin and his
Durin
people.
spoke. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I mean, and that's not to say like, another question that kind of comes up from the company is like, essentially like they asked the question like, did the Balrog attack us because it wanted the ring? And I think the answer to that is no.
No, I don't think it knows the ring is there.
I don't think it knows the ring is there. It's just a purely evil character.
It wouldn't necessarily have interest in the ring.
No, it's older than the ring.
Yeah, and it already has, massive power.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't know if I don't know. I guess a Balrog probably gains some kind of power if it gets a hold of the ring.
yeah.
Um,
I don't know.
but is it more than the power it already has? I don't know. I mean, the thing
Yeah,
kills Gandalf, so
yeah, yeah,
or Gandalf dies in killing it.
yeah. They
That's a
destroy each
that's
other.
yeah.
Um, but the orcs that are there are another question. Are the orcs that are in Khazad-dum allied with Sauron, or are they just orcs that are already in the Misty Mountains?
Well, we find out. I think it's a mix. I think we find out in the next chapter that orcs had gone into Moria,
The elves of Lorien had seen them coming
like a big group of
into
them.
Moria, a big group of them, which implies that they were sent there after they were kind of discovered by uh, the enemy forces, like the disappearing wargs that
Wargs.
we
Yeah.
had, that Gandalf sort of made their presence known on the mountain by lighting the fire in the way that he did.
Yeah. Right.
And he even says like, all right, I've set a signal that essentially says Gandalf was here to
Right.
anybody who is looking for it. And sure enough, as soon as they come down the mountain, the wargs are pursuing them. Right? They
Right.
defeat the wargs without any major loss,
Yeah.
without any loss at all. But they're a known entity. So I
Right.
think that those orcs that the people of Lothlorien saw coming into the mountains were probably sent by Sauron.
Right. I also think it's possible that there were already orcs in Moria.
Right. And I think there were almost certainly, because
Yeah.
we learned that they killed Balin and his
Right.
company. Balin is killed by an orc arrow. And those orcs that overtook that company with, I guess, with the Balrog with them.
Well, that's a good question. I don't know. I would think. I mean, I would think that if someone walks into Moria and starts to set up a little company, that eventually the Balrog's going to take notice and just say no.
Yeah.
And who's going to stand against this thing? Well, nobody, really.
Nobody but Gandalf, yeah.
Nobody but Gandalf. Like nobody in the world but Gandalf. And Elrond's his what's his name? Glorfindel? No,
Glorfindel, yeah.
because Glorfindel killed a Balrog previously, but also died in the effort, right?
Yeah, way back
So,
in the first age of the fall
so
of Brogdwyn.
everybody who fights a Balrog and defeats it ends up dying and getting sent back uh, eventually.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I don't know. It's just that's just speculation. I think did the Balrog is it the Balrog who eventually kind of forced this colony to or defeated this colony of dwarves, or was it just merely orcs? I don't get the sense that the dwarves walk around with like lots of people.
Yeah.
It seems like dwarves kind of go places in small groups, and so I wonder how many people were there. But
I don't know. Let's see if maybe as we like read along, some of these answers will.
yeah,
It's
sure.
it's kind of hilarious that we don't know between the two of us. Between the two of us, we've read the story 100 times, and we still kind of. But I mean, it's Balin is killed by an orc arrow because he goes out to look at the mirror. The mirror. That's hard to say. The mirror, which is like this like magic lake that we're gonna see at the beginning of the next chapter. But we find out that he is killed by an orc arrow. They avenge him, but they kill the orc that shot him, but he's dead. And then it says, poor Balin, he seems to have kept the title he took for less than 5 years. I wonder what happened afterwards, but there's no time to puzzle out the last few pages. So he just like kind of skips ahead in the timeline to the very end. And he says, it is grim reading. I fear their end was cruel. Listen, we cannot get out. We cannot get out. They have taken the bridge and the second hall. Frar and Loney and Nolly fell there. So we don't know who those dwarfs are. Never met them. Then there are 4 lines smeared so that I can only read went 5 days ago. The last lines run, the pool is up to the wall at Westgate. The watcher in the water took Owen. So Owen is a dwarf that we know from The Hobbit. We cannot get out. The end comes. And then drums in the deep. And the last words are, they are coming. So it seems like the orcs have dammed the river that runs in front of the West Gate, which is the gate that they entered with the mithril moon carvings.
Speak friend and enter that door.
The Melon entrance door. And the Watcher on the Water has been there for a while, at least, because they call it the Watcher in the Water. And because the pool rose up far enough, it was able to grab a couple of dwarves there. And they recognize that pretty quickly. Gimli says, it is well for us that the pool had sunk a little and that the Watcher was sleeping down in the southern end. And Gandalf says, they seem to have made a last stand by both doors, but there were not many left by that time. So ended the attempt to retake Moria. It was valiant, but foolish. And this is something that I mentioned to you. Maybe it's obvious to other people, but it was not obvious to me until I started looking for it. But Gandalf says, we will take this book, the Book of Mar-Ezbol, and look at it more closely later. You had better keep it, Gimli, and take it back to Dane if you get a chance. It will interest him, though it will grieve him deeply. Come, let us go. The morning is passing. So I imagine this big ass book.
Yeah.
And he's just like, here, Gimli,
You hold it.
add 8 pounds to your pack.
Yeah, stick that in your backpack. And
But
he
that was
and
the question that I had. I was like, does everybody have backpacks?
I think everybody has a pack. Yeah,
Uh,
and
After I asked you the question, I read ahead a little bit, and it mentions their packs a few times.
yeah,
Uh, like they, even in this chapter, it says they tighten their packs up and go back to back to fight. But it is funny that it just never occurred to me that they had backpacks.
yeah. I kind of love the idea that Gimli's got this thing in his backpack the whole rest of the story. Like
That's the
they're
thing is
running
like, does he have this in like
they're running after Merry and Pippin, and he's got their they run
he's
60 miles or
carrying eight
whatever.
extra pounds on his back?
Yeah, and he or 100
He's not
miles
like,
or
I'm going to
whatever it is.
stash this somewhere and come back and get it later.
No,
Like,
I think he's got it with him. I think he's got it with him
so we should just
all the way to
imagine
the end
that he has.
until they stop in Gondor,
You think he
Minas
stashes
Tirith.
it in Gondor?
I think he stashes it in Minas Tirith before they go, and fight on the plains and all that stuff. But
Now,
yeah,
in my head now, like head canon, he has this like bulging. Like, does he have a pack that's big enough to fit an enormous book in it?
I mean, he's a dwarf, he can carry. 8 pounds is
Yeah,
whatever. It's not.
they're sturdy. They're
It
sturdy
ain't no.
folk.
It ain't no to him. He's got sturdy dwarf legs.
I don't know. I'm just thinking back on like every hike that I've ever gone on.
Yeah, you're like, God,
It's
why did I bring this? I shouldn't have brought any of this stuff. I should
I
have just
always
brought.
end up just tossing stuff on the side of the trail. I mean, like,
You
extra
even
clothes, like a fork.
you almost wish you didn't have water with you. You're like,
You're just
why
like,
did I bring
oh,
this water?
oh my god.
I'd
Or it's
rather,
like you want to get rid of everything but the water, like the
yeah,
water. I'm like, I never have enough water. But like, the spoon that I brought, I'm just gonna slurp it from the bowl.
I'd rather die of thirst than carry this water with me any further.
But yeah, yeah. I just that just made me giggle. I don't know why. Like imagine if Gimli's like, you carry it. Like you're like a foot taller than me.
Nah, he's too proud.
Yeah, I'm sure he would see it as like a an honor to carry it.
I think so.
But yeah, Gandalf is like, come on, let's go. Morning is passing. And Boromir is like, yep, yep. Which way should we go? Like, let's get
Let's get
moving.
going.
We've already spent too much time in this tomb. Gandalf's like, let's go back to the hall because now they know exactly where they are. He says, this is the chamber of Morazabul. The hall must be on the 21st level on the north end. Therefore, we should leave by the eastern arch of the hall, bear right and south, and go downwards. The 21st hall should be on the 7th level. That is 6 above the level of the gates. Tolkien's mind, man. I mean,
I've never seen a diagram of this, but I would like to look up,
I'm sure that somebody has done it, but it's just very clear that in his mind, that sentence is not just a garble of random
Right.
directions. Like it's all consistent. Like if
You
you were
can
to go
actually-
through and do
you
the
can
math,
actually, yeah, reconstruct it. How many levels are there and where are they? And yeah, it's pretty cool.
but it is a little bit like, when you're talking to someone who knows an area well and you're very unfamiliar with the area and they're like, oh yeah, just take a left up on 21st and then, uh, take a right past the Shell station, and then you're going to go down Pleasant Street for a quarter mile. And in the back of my head, I'm always thinking like, I'm just going to put it on my GPS.
Yeah, I don't know why people try to give each other directions anymore, but
it definitely has that kind of vibe where he's just like talking like nobody else knows what he's talking about.
it also impresses on you how large this place is.
It's huge. Yeah.
Anytime you get a description, you're like, wow, this place is just enormous.
Yeah. Then the action starts.
Yeah, it says Gandalf had hardly spoken these words when there came a great noise, a rolling boom that seemed to come from depths far below and to tremble at the stone at their feet. And we've been told that there were drums in the deep in the book. And so this drum beat continues, and then they start to hear horns, cries, the hurrying sound of many feet. Legolas says, they're coming. Gimli says, we cannot get out, which recalls again the book. And then Gandalf yells, trapped. It's really good dialogue. They're coming, cried Legolas. We cannot get out, said Gimli. Trapped, cried Gandalf. Why did I delay?
And that's exactly what happened to the the company of dwarves as written down in this book. They're like kind of almost like echoing
Yep.
those words exactly.
Got trapped in the same spot. And then Gandalf says, "This is really interesting. Well, they're going to close the doors and bar them." And Gandalf says, "Just a minute. Don't close it yet." He springs forward to Boromir's side and draws himself up to his full height. "Who comes hither to disturb the rest of Balin, Lord of Moria?" he cried in a loud voice. There was a rush of hoarse laughter, like the fall of sliding stones into a pit. Amid the clamor, a deep voice was raised in command. And,
So
and
I wonder,
so,
is that the deep
what
voice?
is the deep? First, I have questions. What did Gandalf do? Like, why is it important for Gandalf to say? Is he just trying to be intimidating,
I
or
think so.
is he just trying to get a read on like what's out there? And
I
then
think
the
this is
deep,
like a you cannot pass kind of.
yeah, and then the deep voice, a deep voice of command. That's not Gandalf. That's somebody else. Is that the Balrog?
I mean, it's probably this is why we're not like lore masters, because I know that there are people who like know the answer to
Exactly
this.
who it was. Yeah.
I mean, in my mind, I'm thinking like, okay, it could be the Balrog. The thing that makes me think it might be the Balrog is that it says command,
Yeah, and
which
I mean, that's an important word, right?
like anytime that somebody says something in command or with command or in a commanding voice, like I think that's kind of a catchword for magic or power.
Right.
Like command in Tolkien is something that you have spiritually, naturally. It's not something that you
Yeah, it's like
can
it's like a
fake.
form of agency or something.
And we know
And
that like when they like in just a few pages here, when they do flee, Gandalf has to put a shutting spell on that door that he's just kept ajar. Aragorn is like, here, let me go back and read it exactly. Aragorn says, and here answers my question about packs, like literally on the exact same page that I had the question about whether Gimli had a backpack. Yep, it's right here. They hear doom doom, the walls shake. So I think this is the Balrog.
they hear doom doom.
I think that the doom that they're hearing, it might be a drum or it might be like just the presence of the Balrog is like undulating the very walls of
Yeah,
Moria.
I really like that reading. That's cool.
Like it says a little bit early up that it says doom doom rolled again as if huge hands were turning the very caverns of Moria into a vast drum. So I think it's that the presence of the Balrog has this like undulating,
Yeah.
uncontainable power
Right.
that's like shaking the very walls.
I love that reading. It's so much better than like a big drum that a troll has or whatever.
And I don't know if there are like literal drums. I think there are literal horns, but I wonder if it's just the Balrog's power itself is the
Yeah,
drum.
that's cool.
But Aragorn says, "Slam the doors and wedge them, and keep your packs on as long as you can. We
Mhm.
may get a chance to cut our way out yet." But Gandalf, in his wisdom, says, "No, we must not get shut in." So he's like, "Don't bar all the doors. Keep the east door ajar, and we will go that way if we get a chance." And that is what they do.
Yeah, right.
After the first like kind of volley of orcs attacks and the troll,
Yeah.
they retreat back through that east door that he tells them to keep ajar, and that's the one that he puts the shutting spell on in a minute. But yeah, I think to answer your question, who comes hither to disturb the rest of Balin, Lord of Moria? He cried in a loud voice. There was hoarse laughter, so they mock him in response.
Mhm.
They know that they have
They already
someone
defeated
of
him.
they have great power. Not only have they defeated Balin, so they're
Yeah.
like, all right, yeah, you're intoning the name of the guy that we already killed,
Yeah, right.
but they have this spiritual, malevolent force behind them, and so they just laugh. They're like,
Yeah,
all right, like who's this old man?
right.
Like we're about to just run through you.
Right.
And it says, amid the clamor, a deep voice was raised in command. Doom, boom, doom went the drums in the deep. It's such like classic Tolkien prose. Doom, boom, doom.
The fact that the drums follow immediately from the voice raised in the deep, I think is evidence that that drumming sound is, it's not, merely a war drum. It's something to do with the presence of the Balrog and
Right.
the Balrog's power over these orcs. And even if the Balrog isn't in service of Sauron, once the orcs come into contact with the
Yeah.
Balrog owns them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, More than Sauron can, because Sauron isn't there.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know.
Even though they're
Um,
Sauron's slaves, they're like, and that's something I think we'll kind of continually question throughout the book is how much agency orcs have on their own and how much they are just like automatons that are doing the will of Sauron. Like orcs. I know that like Tolkien's mind changed on this, especially as like become more of a talking point among Tolkien fans since the Rings of Power show. Like in my mind, when I'm reading this book, the orcs are purely evil and they don't have souls. They are like demons that are purely evil.
yeah.
There's no kindness in them. There's no goodness in them. There's no like I think the kind of postmodern reading of like all bad guys need to have a compelling backstory to make them relatable or whatever. I think that that's not in Tolkien's mind.
As he's writing.
I think later, as people asked, like, well, okay, does Aragorn essentially like perpetuate a genocide against the orcs? Tolkien started to be like, oh, well, maybe I need to like start thinking about, maybe orcs were just like, you know, uh, elves that had been, but then if they're elves that were corrupted, then that means they have to have souls. And if they have
Mm-hmm.
souls, that means they have to be redeemable.
Mm-hmm.
Like all those questions, I think in our very like kind of postmodern world, like the Rings of Power show had to like make them relatable and have motivations that were
Yeah,
understandable.
it's understandable from a modern storytelling point of view. I think the interesting thing here is this idea again of command,
Yeah.
and I think about. I mean, the ring grants power of command.
Yeah.
We find that out especially from Boromir.
Or at least it makes you
Um,
think that you would have it.
yeah, it makes you think that you'd have it. I think you would actually have it. I think that if you were the
Yeah.
right kind of character, you would have a certain kind of, it would grant you some command. But also, we see in the character of Sauron that Sauron has this
The voice, they call it. Yeah.
the voice, this power of command, and Sauron rules over orcs the same way that Sauron and the Balrog do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the orcs are, in some way,
Bendable, moldable.
more susceptible, I think, than others to the power of command. But characters who are not orcs, when they come up against Saruman and his voice, his power of command, are pretty concerned about their ability to maintain their agency or their free will
Yeah.
in the face of this. And so I think it does go, that does go a long way to sort of say, like, the orcs are corrupted, in some way, even if they have a culture, um, they've been corrupted in some way, and are more susceptible or something like that. I do think, I mean, gosh, it gets so hairy, um, but I think you're right that on my first reading, and I would think on Tolkien's first writing, like, he sees this as a mass of almost like ants, you
Ants.
know, that
Yeah.
that move with a will that's not their own,
Yeah. And when you
and
take out
that,
the queen, you take out the whole
yeah,
colony.
it all crumbles. And so, um, I think that I think that's kind of what's supposed to be, or that was like maybe what was originally intended. But I do think that I think the instinct to try to think beyond that is the right one,
Yeah.
as like a moral
Yeah.
position. Because the idea, especially kind of holding Tolkien to his own kind of theological standards,
Right.
um, to say like, "Oh, actually, you kind of missed. You have a big blind spot here, you know."
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and
And that's the biggest like critique of Tolkien, I think, is that from kind of postmodern readers is like, okay, the good guys are good and the bad guys are bad, and there's no gray area. But I think even in the Two Towers, which we'll get to eventually, Sam has a moment where he sees one of the Easterlings killed, and he wonders like, all right, like I wonder what led him to this moment. I wonder what motivated him. What lie or what threat led him to go so far away from home. And he's just another soldier, just
yeah,
like Sam. Like Sam's far away from home, and he's been swept up in this conflict that he can't understand.
the idea that it's just black and white is not really the case, except when it comes to this question of the orcs. You're like, what are these things?
Like in my mind, I was texting you the other day talking about this. I was like, I think sometimes in stories there just needs to be bad guys,
Yeah, especially in
and we don't.
mythology like this.
In mythological reading like this, like there's something that we get out of like stories of heroism against truly evil characters. One thing that is true about Tolkien consistently is that characters are given a chance at redemption. Gollum is not executed. Saruman is given a chance to repent. Even Grima Wormtongue is given a chance to repent.
Mm-hmm.
The bad guys are always given a chance to join the good and to use their knowledge of the enemy for their own redemption. So Tolkien did not, I think, have this like black and white view of morality that I think a lot of people lob at him. But in the case of the orcs, I do think that the orcs are purely evil, and that within the framework of the story, um, uh, they are like they're demons. They're they're not they're not a group that I think Tolkien intended us to feel bad for, to have any kind of remorse
No,
at them being remediated.
no, I don't think so.
Yeah. Well, that was a long aside. We'll see how much of that I keep
Yeah, sure.
in the cut. But um, I think to answer your initial question, which got us on that little 20-minute tangent, but you said like, why does Gandalf like go out? He reports back to the group. There are orcs, many of them, and some are large and evil, black uruks of Mordor. For the moment, they are hanging back, but there is something else there. A great cave troll, I think, or more than one. There's no hope of escape that way. So it seems like Gandalf poked his head out to like, on its face, give like this like war cry. But in
Little
reality, he was just like,
little reconnaissance.
what are we dealing with here?
Yeah, right.
And the answer is they're dealing with more than they're kind of cut out for. They say Aragorn is such a badass here.
Yeah.
Says there is no sound outside here yet. He was standing by the eastern door listening. So this is the door that they're going to escape out of here in a minute. The passage on this side plunges straight down a stair. It plainly does not lead back towards the hall. But it is no good flying blindly this way with the pursuit just behind. So they're like, all right, we can't just like bar this door and then run out this east door. We need to make a stand first. We need to make them have a moment to like, they like in their mind, they're like, they don't know how many of us there are, right? We're gonna make a stand here. We're gonna make them delay, and then we're gonna flee out this east side. He says, we must do something to delay the enemy first. We will make them fear the chamber of Mazarbul, he said grimly, feeling the edge of his sword, Anduril.
I
Heck
love
yeah.
it. It's so great. So the orcs finally make the attack. They do bar that door, and the first person who gets a cut here is Boromir. Boromir
Yeah.
leaped forward and hewed at the arm that comes through the door with all his might, but the sword rang, glanced aside, and fell from his shaken hand. The blade was notched. So I think that's
The flat toeless foot makes me think it's the troll.
the troll. That's right. And then this is such a great moment. Can I read this?
Go for it, dude.
So this is a great moment for Frodo. And this first phrase is so beautiful. Suddenly, and to his own surprise, Frodo felt a hot wrath blaze up in his heart. The Shire, he cried. I want to cry. God.
Uh,
The Shire, he cried. And springing beside Boromir, he stooped and stabbed with Sting at the hideous foot. There was a bellow, and the foot jerked back, nearly wrenching Sting from Frodo's arm. Black drops dripped from the blade and smoked on the floor. Boromir hurled himself against the door and slammed it again. One for the Shire, cried Aragorn. The hobbit's bite is deep. You have a good blade, Frodo, son of Drogo.
you have a
Epic.
good blade.
Oh, it's epic. Frodo just, you know, and again, the hobbits are such brave little dudes. They're not just there. They're not along for the ride. They're such a part of it, you know.
Yeah.
Um, and so the fact that Frodo gets that cut is awesome.
Yeah, I mean he cuts the troll after Boromir fails to do it. Like Boromir hits it as hard as he can and it notches his blade.
Yeah, it must hit the armor or something.
Or I think
Because you
it's
got to,
just that it's
or
like
is it just
so
so hard?
its scales are so hard that
Yeah,
Boromir
that makes
can't
sense.
can't hew it, but Sting is like such a good magic
Well,
sword.
yeah, Sting is magic, right? So, right.
But the company of orcs they hit the door with rams and hammers and the door cracks and staggers back and the opening opens suddenly wide. Arrows come whistling in. There was a horn blast and a rush of feet. The orcs, one after another, leapt into the chamber. How many there were, the company could not count. The affray was sharp, but the orcs were dismayed by the fierceness of the defenses. And then we get an awesome description of like each member of the company doing what they do best.
Yeah.
Legolas shot two through the throat. Gimli hewed the legs from under another that had sprung up on Balin's tomb. Boromir and Aragorn slew many. When 13 had fallen and the rest fled shrieking, leaving defenders unharmed, except for Sam, who had a scratch upon his scalp. A quick duck had saved him, and he had felled his orc, a sturdy thrust with his barrow blade. A fire was smoldering in his brown eyes that would have made Ted Sandeman step backwards if he had seen it.
Hell yeah. uh, Now is the time, cried Gandalf. Let us go before the troll returns.
I love it. I mean, it's almost like a scene from like the Avengers or something. You know, you have this like pan
Yeah,
shot, and
like
you got like
around the.
yeah, and they're each
Oh,
using their signature weapons. Like Legolas is
right.
like pew, pew, Gimli's oh yeah, "Ah!" and Aragorn and Boromir just slaying people with their swords, and then you got
Yeah.
little Sam being like, ah, I got one, for the Shire.
So great.
Merry and Pippin not mentioned. I imagine they're pissing their pants.
I think so. I think they're freaking out. So before they try to leave, and then this huge orc chieftain, almost man high, clad in black mail from head to foot, leaped into the chamber. It's almost like a boss.
Exactly. Says his broad, flat face was swart, his eyes were like coals, and his tongue was red. So you imagine him kind of coming out like a demon with his tongue hanging out, and it's like bright red against the darkness, and so it
Yeah.
has this like amazing contrast.
I looked up swart. It means gloomy and malignant.
Gloomy and malignant. Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good word.
Swart. Which I guess is where we get the word swarthy.
Yeah, it's related to swarthy. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But he thrust his spear at Frodo, and the blow caught him on the right side, and he was hurled against the wall and pinned. Sam, with a cry, hacked at the spear shaft and broke it. So Sam again, like ready to rumble.
It's all that grass he's cuts.
Like, exactly, man. He's ready to mow these suckers down.
Yeah.
But even as the orc flung down the truncheon, what's a truncheon? Did
I
did
should know
either of us
that.
look that up?
No. It's just one of those fantasy words I've always just assumed. What's a truncheon?
And swept out his scimitar, which is like a curved blade. But Anduril came down upon his helm. There was a flash like flame, and the helm burst asunder.
A truncheon is like just like a club.
That makes sense. Like it sounds like a club, doesn't it? Truncheon.
Yeah.
The orc fell with cloven head. His followers fled, howling, as Boromir and Aragorn sprang at them. Now, shouted Gandalf. Now is the last chance. Run for it. Ooh, but here we get this. Here we get this like kind of foreshadowing of
Mm.
the Balrog again. Doom, doom went the drums in the deep. The great voice rolled out again. The rolling of the voice also has like that sense of drum, like a rolling drum.
Right.
Um, uh, so they make a run for it. Aragorn picks up Frodo, and the others are followed, but Gimli has to be dragged out by Legolas. He doesn't want to leave
Mm.
Balin's tomb. Aragorn has Frodo like tucked under his arm like a small child. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, like the way I would grab my kids, like if they were throwing a fit in the grocery store and we had to move.
Yeah.
You just kind of like scoop them up, the dad scoop, you know?
Right.
And Frodo's like, I'm all right. Put me down. I can walk. And Aragorn, it says Aragorn nearly dropped him in amazement.
Oh yeah. He thinks he's dead, I think.
And it's like, I thought you were dead. And Gandalf is like, all right, we don't have time for wonder. All right, we have to get running to the bottom. But I do think it's so like imagine what Aragorn is feeling in that moment.
Yeah, now I
He's
need to
like,
carry Frodo's dead body out of Moria.
yeah, and with it, the ring.
Right.
Like he may have thought that was the end right there. He
Yeah.
did, I imagine. Which is why he's so shocked when Frodo speaks. Because he's already started like mourning the defeat of the quest. But now we get Gandalf making a stand against that east gate that they just ran out of. It says, go quickly and choose paths leading to the right and downwards. He says, wait a few minutes for me at the bottom, but if I do not come soon, go on. So Gandalf knows that something is up. He's like, I need to make sure that they get out. So he's willing to sacrifice himself in this moment.
But again, Aragorn says, we can't leave you to hold the door alone. I don't care that you're Gandalf. Like,
Yeah.
we're going to stand with you, you
Yeah.
know? But you know, he does take Gandalf's direction here, but at every step here, Gandalf is very willing to stop and sacrifice himself.
He says, do as I say. Fiercely, he says. Swords are no more use here. Go. And they obey him, even though they don't want to leave Gandalf. And they just kind of grope their way in the dark. But without Gandalf there with his light, they're not able to see. And they almost almost stumble multiple times.
It says they groped their way down a long flight of steps, and it says that the passage was lit by no shaft and was utterly dark. So they're in a cave where there's there's no light. It says, except high above them, a faint glimmer of the wizard's staff. So maybe there's like a tiny amount of light, but they really can't see where they're going or what they're doing.
And they can hear words, but they can't make out what the words are. We'll find out later that this is Gandalf putting a shutting spell on the door. It says the walls seemed to be trembling. Every now and again, the drum beats throbbed and rolled. Doom, doom. So, I mean, I think this is like the the power of the Balrog, like literally shaking the walls.
The walls of a mountain. I
Yeah,
mean, right?
is
It's
very
not
powerful.
it's not made of like plywood and glue. It's made of the stone of this mountain.
Exactly.
Um,
Extremely, extremely powerful. And suddenly at the top of the stair, there was a stab of white light. The drum beats broke out wildly. Doom, boom, boom, boom. Gandalf came flying down the steps and fell on the ground in the midst of the company. So imagine like how that like there's never been a description of Gandalf falling.
no, he's expended a lot of power. But it is funny the way that he says, well, that's over.
Yeah.
It's such a human moment. And
He just like falls on his face in front of him. He just like
it,
busts his ass running down these stairs, this old man. I
and
mean,
they
that's
must,
got to be,
but they must be looking at, I mean, for Gandalf to fall down in the midst of them,
yeah.
they must be like, what is happening?
Yeah.
Like, why does he seem so tired? What happened up there?
Yeah.
What kind of magic, does Gandalf have, that he could, that he can face down or somehow bar a door with, seemingly dozens, if not hundreds of orcs on the other side of it. But he says, I have done all that I could, but I have met my match and have nearly been destroyed. Destroyed by, I don't know, destroyed by what? It starts to get more and more dire. The
Yeah.
more and more Gandalf is up against, his limits, the scarier it gets, I think.
And they flee again. I mean, they run down. It says that Gandalf felt the ground with his staff like a blind man, and he calls Gimli up to him, uh, supposedly because he sees best in the dark.
Yeah.
But he's old here, like he's severely weakened. He's leaning on Gimli
Mhm.
to lead them. It says every now and again it descended a flight of steps 50 or more to a level. At the moment that was their chief danger, for in the dark they could not see a descent until they came on it and put their feet out into emptiness. So they're running in the dark. They're fleeing here, and every once
That's
in a while there's a sheer drop.
that's a terrible feeling when you like misjudge how many steps there are, or you don't know that there's a step, even if it's like this,
Oh, that'll ruin
you
your
know,
day.
like an inch, and
Yeah.
you like step out and you expect your foot to stop and it keeps going,
Yeah.
is a bad feeling. And
Oh,
so
that'll
this
yeah.
is,
It'll ruin my
yeah,
life.
that's awful. And it hurts your back. I mean, there's all kinds of ways that it screws you up. And so it's like this over and over again, 50 flights of stairs, or 50 sets of 50 stairs at a time.
Yeah, that'll
Um,
that'll that'll kill you. Yeah, and they're running from the enemy for an hour. It says at
oh
the end of
yeah,
an hour they had gone a mile. So they're kind of just like quietly, hopelessly running away for an hour in the dark. Like that must have been the longest hour.
ter- terrifying.
And it seems like they don't have any, like they just assume they're toast. It says almost they began to hope that they would escape. At the bottom of the seventh flight, Gandalf halted. But he says, like, I'm so tired that I have to rest for a minute, even if all the orcs that have ever spawned are after us. So he's beat. And that's when Gimli says Gimli took his arm and helps him down to a seat on the steps. Gandalf is like an old man here. Like
Yeah,
he's always an old man, but he's having to be like really ministered to by the company here. Gimli takes him by the arm. I mean, that's like such an intimate thing
that's how you
that
help a old person get around because they're unsure of their footing. And
exactly, like, this isn't the Gandalf that we usually see here.
yeah, he's such a pillar of strength.
So there's something really striking, I think, about Gimli being gentle with him in this way, helping him,
Mhm.
supporting him. Gimli took his arm and helped him down to a seat on the step. What happened to way up there at the door? He asked. Did you meet the beater of the drums? So that definitely like reinforces the idea that the drum beats that we're hearing are the Balrog.
Mhm.
Gandalf says, I do not know, but I found myself suddenly faced by something that I have not met before. I could think of nothing to do but to try and put a shutting spell on the door. I know many, but to do things of that kind rightly requires time, and even then the door can be broken by strength. As I stood there, I could hear orc voices on the other side. At any moment, I thought they would burst it open. I could not hear what was said, but they seemed to be talking in their own hideous language. All that I caught was gash, that is fire. Then something came into the chamber. I felt it through the door, and the orcs themselves were afraid and fell silent. It laid hold of the iron ring, then it perceived me in my spell. So Balrog and Gandalf, this is their first face off between this like thin barrier of the door. And Gandalf has put a spell on the door to keep it shut.
So he puts a spell on the door to keep it shut. Then the Balrog, we don't know it's the Balrog yet, but then this, entity touches the door and perceives the spell and puts a counter spell against Gandalf's spell.
Yeah.
And something about that, it says it nearly broke, Gandalf says, it nearly broke me. For an instant, the door left my control and began to open. I had to speak a word of command. That proved too great a strain, and the door burst into pieces. Something dark as a cloud was blocking out all the light inside, and I was thrown backward down the stairs. Then the chamber, the chamber um, collapses.
Yeah.
All the wall gave away, and the roof of the chamber as well, I think. So that sort of saves Gandalf. This
Yeah.
something about the spell and counterspell creates so much energy that it
Yes.
creates a collapse.
Right.
Um, and this is sad. He says, "I'm afraid Balin is buried deep,
Yeah.
and maybe something else is buried there too. I can't say. Maybe all the orcs that were there too."
Yeah. And they kind of have that like as a moment of relief where they're like, okay, well, yeah, Balin is buried, but hopefully whatever this horrendously powerful evil being is also buried.
Yeah,
I do want to point out, I mean, I know hopefully people aren't sick of us mentioning the word command, but uh, it's capitalized here.
yeah. There
I
it is
had to
again.
speak a word of command with a capital C. Um, that proved too great a strain. And so Gandalf's word of command is what explodes the door
Right.
and the entire chamber. The kind of combined power of these two counter spells collapses the whole room. He says, "I've never felt so spent." And now they finally take a minute to look at Frodo, and they're like,
What happened to
"Hey,
you?
yeah, we all thought you were a very brave but a very dead hobbit."
Mm-hmm.
Aragorn said, I can only say that hobbits are made of stuff so tough that I have never met the like of it. Had I known, I would have spoken softer at the inn in Bree. That spear thrust would have skewered a wild boar."
Aragorn's got a good sense of humor.
Yeah,
Um, as much as he comes across as sort of like staid and regal, um, he does have a funny sense of humor. He's got that kind of funny relationship with Sam, and then to say here, "made of a stuff so tough I've never met the like of it," is really. And maybe he sort of suspects like, something's going on here. Like Frodo should definitely be dead. Like
yeah,
it's not Aragorn's first rodeo.
exactly.
He has seen people die. And I love that, Gandalf says, "You take after Bilbo. There's more
Yeah.
about thee than meets the eye, as I said of him long ago." Frodo wondered if the remark meant more than it said. Like, yeah, well, he's referencing an entire story. So,
But he's like, I think they know I have my magic coat.
yeah,
Uh,
right.
so Gimli looks ahead and he goes, I think there's a light ahead, but it's not daylight. It is red. What can it be? Gandalf is like, fire. I wonder if gash, he says. I wonder if that's what they meant, that the lower levels are on fire. Still, we can only go on. So they keep going forward, like even though they're pretty sure that like the way ahead of them is blocked by fire, they're not going to be able to keep going. But what they find is that the orcs have set the fire in the wrong place. And they've actually made it so that they have a clear line to the bridge, but the orcs are trapped behind fire. So this is just another example that in Tolkien, the good guys almost never win. The bad guys defeat themselves.
Yeah, bad guys bumble into defeating themselves.
Yeah, and that's basically exactly what happens here. They set the fire to block their exit, and what they do is they actually block their own pursuit.
Right.
And so they kind of they have a nice little laugh about it. It's kind of like a ha 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 ha. They
Fools.
yeah, they think that uh they think that they've devised some devilry for our welcome, but instead they've just uh blocked themselves. And in my margins here I have the word fate written,
Mm.
that they're kind of constantly just like they know what they have to do. They have to try,
Mm-hmm.
right? Even though it's completely hopeless. They're like, there's no way we're going to get past because they're going to be there ready for us. But the hand of fate is just constantly working in gentle ways. Like all they have to do is, or in this case, not so gentle. All
Yeah.
they have to do is just continue to do the next best thing, and
Mm-hmm.
fate works in their favor. Gandalf says, if we had come by the main road down from the upper halls, which is what they plan to do,
Mm-hmm.
we would have been trapped here. Let us hope that the fire now lies between us and pursuit. Come, there's no time to lose. So if they hadn't been waylaid by the orcs in the chamber,
Well, the orcs never should have attacked them. The orcs should have let them leave.
if they let them leave out the way they planned,
Yeah. Like,
they would have been
wait.
completely trapped.
Right. Right.
by this fire that they've set. But because they attacked and they went a way they didn't expect, now there's a fire between them and the orcs.
Right.
Boromir, ha 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 ha! They did not expect this. He
Old
laughed.
old
The
Chuck Nuts
fire has
himself.
cut them off. We are on the wrong side. So Gandalf gives them like a quick like command here. He's like, "This is the second hall of Old Moria. The gates are near, away beyond the eastern end, on the left side, not more than a quarter of a mile. Across the bridge, up a broad stair, along a wide road, through the first hall, and out." So there's a home stretch here, and they're making their way over, and they come to the bridge. So this is the meaningful moment. Let's just like look at how the bridge is described. I think that the way the bridge is described is really just well written. Like you can get like a real clear picture of how the bridge looks. The outer door could only be reached by a slender bridge of stone without curb or rail that spanned the chasm with one curving spring of 50 feet. It was an ancient defense of the dwarves against any enemy that might capture the first hall and the outer passages. They could only pass across it in single file. At the brink, Gandalf halted, and the others came up in a pack behind. "Lead the way, Gimli. Pippin and Merry next. Straight on and on the stair beyond the door." And so you get a sense like Gimli goes across, then Merry and Pippin go across, and that is when, as before Legolas crosses the bridge, that is when Legolas sees the Balrog. It says Legolas turned and set an arrow to a string that was long shot for a small bow. He drew, but his hand fell, and the arrow slipped to the ground. He gave a cry of dismay and fear. So, do you want to have our argument before we get to the part that's like actually, actually
Well,
like really moving and beautiful about this chapter?
yeah, I suppose we should. I was looking forward to it. Now I feel, I don't know. Maybe it's just my nature to avoid conflict, but I do want to investigate this because I think it's richer than the debate. Let's put it that way.
So the debate is
Do Balrogs or does this Balrog have wings or not?
Logan is team no wings.
Let me.
I I also agree that the Balrog does not have wings, but I think that he essentially has wings.
I want to state that the Balrog doesn't have wings like a dragon
No,
or some kind of bone wings
no,
or I think I guess what I'm trying to say is that the Balrog does not have physical wings. There's no
yes,
description of physical wings here.
yes.
And I think we can get into that if we want. I don't know how I guess I don't know how like nerdy our listeners are. I suppose that it bears kind of this close reading, and that's what this podcast is about. So
Well, okay, the episode that I just edited, I very boldly said that I was going to kick your ass in
oh,
this
is that
debate.
right? Oh, I
So I feel
forgot
like you
that.
should feel less bad about being combative because I was like, I am going to kick your ass in the debate about whether the Balrogs have wings. And so let's just like read the description of the Balrog, and then we can
Okay.
give our cases for wings or no wings.
So Legolas is dismayed. There are two trolls. The trolls fling these stones over the fire. Um, but it wasn't the trolls that filled the elf with terror. It was something that had come up behind them. What it was could not be seen. I think that's really interesting. It's like a
Interesting.
great. It's like a great shadow. It's almost like a negative space or something like that. It's the lack of.
Yes.
Uh, you really can't describe it. You can only describe its effects on its environment. In the middle of this great shadow is a dark form, of man
Yes.
shape maybe yet greater, and a power and terror seem to be in it and to go before it.
Right.
It came to the edge of the fire, and then it has an effect on the light. The light faded as if a cloud had bent over it. Then with a rush it leaped across the fissure. The flames roared up to greet it, and wreathed about it, and a black smoke swirled in the air. Its streaming mane kindled and blazed behind it. So there's a question there. Also, does this thing have a mane of fire?
Yeah.
Or when it passes by fire, does fire sort of
Wreathe around it, and then a
wreathe
mane
around
is
it?
just a, it's almost like a halo of fire
It's a halo of
around it.
fire because it's almost like a singularity, right? It's like a black hole that like
Yes.
any light that encounters this thing bends around, and so it appears to have a
Yes.
mane. It doesn't
Yes.
have. It's not like it has like a fiery mane.
Like in the Peter Jackson movies, it has a mane of fire and wings,
Yeah,
right? But
but
one thing that
I
you pointed out is that it's like it uses the passive voice
right.
to
So I
describe its wings in a minute.
but I think the only thing that can be described about this thing is in negative is like the negative sense of what's happening, right? So
Yeah.
like there's not a lot of positive descriptions of the thing. It's a
Right.
lack of being. It's a lack of essence.
Right.
It's the dimming of the light. That's how you like understand where it is, not because like it's a big fiery demon, right?
And it's almost like
Um,
you can't see it directly, especially before it's wreathed in fire. It says that there's a dark shape in the middle of it of man shape maybe. So like even the shape of it has that maybe qualifier attached to it. So there's something about it where it's almost like if you're looking at something dark in the dark, you can't make out the edges of it.
yeah.
And so I think there's something so terrifying about it, but it's like a spiritual terror. It's not
Mhm.
like an impending like physical creature. And it really reminds me of in the Silmarillion, there's a character called Ungoliant,
Mm.
who's a giant spider who works with Morgoth. And one of the features of Ungoliant is that she eats everything, and she kind of like spits out this darkness that isn't darkness in the sense of like an absence of light. It's a darkness that has like a positive quality to it. It's like
Yeah,
darker
that's
than
interesting.
darkness.
Yeah. So, do you want me to talk about the simile and what I see as the extended simile, and then my reading of the description of these wings?
Go for it.
Okay. So, always shadow is being wrapped around this thing, and it's something about what we get are these descriptions of the way the shadow affects the light and the way that the light sort of bends around the shadow. And so if we skip forward just a little bit and we see Gandalf on the bridge, Gandalf's in the middle of the span. He's leaning on his staff. The enemy gets to the bridge and halts, facing him. And it says, the shadow about it reached out like two vast wings. That's a simile.
Right.
So the shadow is like wings. And it doesn't just, it's not just located where the Balrog physically is, it wreathes around it and extends from it.
Right.
Gandalf says what he says. The Balrog doesn't say anything in answer. The fire in it seemed to die, but the darkness grew. So somehow the Balrog is like gathering something to itself, some power.
Yes.
It steps forward on the bridge, and then it says, it suddenly drew up to a great height, and its wings were spread from wall to wall. But still Gandalf could be seen, etc.
Glimmering in the gloom, which is a great
Yeah, it's awesome.
alliteration.
So that's the piece where people are like, well, it's right here. It says it here. It says it has wings. It says it stretches wings from wall to wall. Well, that's not what it says. It doesn't say that it stretched its wings from wall to wall. It says its wings were spread from wall to wall, which is passive voice. So we go from active voice, it suddenly drew itself up to a great height, to passive voice, its wings were spread from wall to wall. So the wings are not described as sort of part and parcel of the physical being of the Balrog. They're described as an effect that the Balrog has on its environment, or an effect of the Balrog with its environment.
Right.
Um, and so that's where I see like that switch from active voice to passive voice. I think there's something going on there, and it has to be read in conjunction with this previous description that it's like a great shadow, a dark form maybe a man shape. We only really get the edges of it. We never, it's not like, okay, so it's got these wings, and the wings are, they're such and such span, and, it's got like six like of these tendrils that are like webbed by,
Right.
by like a membrane, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
So that's what I mean. It doesn't have wings. Um, we went back and forth, and I'm curious to hear your.
Well, so I think that the sentence, it's, or I guess the part of the sentence, its wings were spread from wall to wall. There's like the possessive of like its wings. So you put it in there, its wings. That's the same as its mane. Its
Yeah.
mane was kindled is also passive. But so I guess like, it's the mane. We're not saying it's necessarily like hair follicles that are kindled, but we're
Yeah.
saying that like the way that the fire like rolled off of him looked like the mane of a lion. In
Mm-hmm.
the same way, the way that the darkness wreathes around him is in the shape of wings.
Uh-huh.
So I do think that I think I agree with you that these are not winged creatures, but I do think that were we to look at the Balrog, we would say that it looked like it had wings because of the darkness around him. So I'm okay with pointing at them and saying the wings, the mane. I mean, it's been described in so many different ways, and it's been illustrated in so many different ways, or depicted in film in so many different ways. But I think if we were actually like in the room, if this was a real thing, we would actually like have a lot of trouble describing what it looked like.
Yeah. I don't have, I mean, obviously I don't have like a comprehensive knowledge of all the art that's ever been made around Tolkien, but I've never seen a depiction of the Balrog that's really sufficient.
No.
And maybe it's impossible
Yeah.
to produce something like that, but I've never even seen something that approaches what we're like what's being described here.
No.
And so I think it's fair to depict the Balrog with wings,
Yeah.
because I think there's something really alien and terrifying about this thing.
Yeah.
And so to have something that has a mane, that has fire streaming from its nostrils, that carries a whip and a sword,
That are like on
um,
fire, like the sword and
yeah, that are on
whip seem to
fire,
be on
that
fire.
it has this effect on the mountain, it has this effect on, it has this commanding presence, it has, it has sort of like a negative being or something like that. And again, like I think we mentioned this last episode or the episode before, that in Tolkien's understanding of good and evil, he would, I think, say that, or I think he would agree that evil has no being of its own. It's always something that's
A negation.
a corruption of the good, a negation of the good.
Yeah.
And so this is like the ultimate form of that.
Yeah.
Um, maybe even more than like something like Sauron, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
this thing is completely malignant.
Yeah.
It's totally bent toward the destruction of everything around it.
Yeah.
And as a servant of it's a demon of Satan, right? Like,
Yeah.
as a servant of not just Sauron, like Sauron is small potatoes compared to Morgoth. It makes sense to depict it in a way that is that's totally alien and terrifying.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, well, before let's kind of move on from this discussion and just
Okay.
discuss the uh the the last stand, Gandalf's last stand on the bridge. But I will say I think that you have convinced me. Like as I was reading it, preparing for this, we've been talking about this episode for weeks, but
Mm-hmm.
I was like, all right, I always said that the Balrog didn't have wings, but after my reading, I texted you and I was like, it says it spread its wings, and you said it says its wings were spread,
I think I
and
said no, it doesn't.
you were like, you're wrong. It does not say it spread its wings, and I was like, it says right here it spread its wings. You're like, it says its wings were spread. So thank you for schooling me on the passive voice. I think we can safely say that you won the debate. I shouldn't have spoken so brazenly. Much like the Balrog, you have humbled me. I concede defeat. I no longer think that the Balrog has wings.
Zach, I believe you. I believe you'll only come back stronger. You know,
Zach the Zach the
Zach the
White.
White.
Please nobody clip that out of context. All
No,
right.
yeah.
Um, so let's like move on from the discussion of like how the Balrog looks to
Mm-hmm.
Gandalf's last stand. So Gandalf, he sees the Balrog. Legolas is the first one to kind of name what it is. A Balrog has come. And Gimli says, Durin's Bane. And he lets his axe fall and he covers his face.
Mm.
So, like, Legolas and Gimli, because of who they are, really understand just how powerful this thing is. And it says, a Balrog, muttered Gandalf. Now I understand. He faltered and leaned heavily on his staff. What an evil fortune. And I am already weary. So Gandalf is an old man here. You know,
Mm-hmm.
he is physically and spiritually like deflated before he even has to do this fight.
Mm-hmm.
It says the dark figure streaming with fire raced towards them. The orcs yelled and poured over the gangways. Then Boromir raised his horn and blew. Loud the challenge rang and bellowed like the shout of many throats under the cavernous roof. For a moment the orcs quailed, and the fiery shadow halted. The echoes died as suddenly as a flame blown out by a dark wind, and the enemy advanced again. Boromir stops the Balrog in its tracks.
With a horn blast.
Boromir is a badass.
That's awesome. That's so
Like
good.
the horn blow of Gondor
Mm-hmm.
stops the Balrog in its tracks, and I just think that that's worth noting.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, he can't defeat the Balrog, but he's going to make him second guess.
Right.
Over the bridge, cries Gandalf, recalling his strength. Fly. This is a foe beyond any of you. I must hold the narrow way. Fly. Aragorn and Boromir did not heed the command, but still held their ground, side by side, behind Gandalf at the far end of the bridge. The others halted within the doorway at the hall's end and turned, unable to leave their leader to face the enemy alone.
Is there a double meaning there? I must hold the narrow way. I mean, he's talking about the bridge, but I sort
Yeah.
of it rings to me like it's the only choice
Yeah.
we have is this, and I'm
We
the
have
one to
we have
stand,
one place that we can go and I have to hold it.
and I'm the one to stand there. I must hold the narrow way, the narrow path, the you know,
There's like definitely a biblical resonance
right,
to that phrase, the narrow way.
right. There's a singular kind of charge that
Yeah.
Gandalf, sees that he has now.
The Balrog comes up to Gandalf and faces him. Says Gandalf stood in the middle of the span, so we can imagine him like dead in the center. I love how they describe the span as a spring.
Yeah,
There's a spring, so you can imagine like a spring that's bent, and so it's like kind of like a parabola of the bridge. You can imagine, and Gandalf standing right dead in the middle, and the rest of the company is now on the other side. Aragorn and Boromir are standing behind him on the end of the spring. It says Gandalf stood leaning on the staff in his left hand, but in his other hand glamoring gleamed, cold and white. So Gandalf is leaning against the staff. He can't even stand. He's so tired. And he's just holding out his sword in front of him. He says, You cannot pass. I am a servant of the secret fire, wielder of the flame of Arnor. You cannot pass. The dark fire will not avail you, flame of Hurun. Go back to the shadow. You cannot pass. Iconic.
absolutely.
Like you're not gonna pass this bridge.
Not you shall not pass.
Yeah. Which
You,
is how I would have quoted it if because of the movie.
so I would have quoted it, and it's probably how I would have written it also.
Yeah. What do you think the difference between cannot and shall not?
you cannot is more definitive, I think,
Like
because
you were unable.
you are unable to pass, and maybe plays in. You know, you mentioned fate before. Maybe uh plays into that narrative that Gandalf knows he's a part of. You know, that song of creation.
Yeah.
Um, even though you know the story of the ring ends up being a minor piece of the story of creation. What does it get? Like two sentences in the Silmarillion. Uh,
It gets a short chapter.
oh, it does. Okay,
Yeah.
but that statement you cannot pass. This is not part of the story for
Yeah.
you to pursue the company to its demise.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and so this is the place where you end right
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
Is it is iconic.
And it gets me every time.
Yeah, him like leaning on his staff, like not even doesn't even have the ability to stand up straight here.
Yeah.
Um, is not in a position of strength. Has described how weary he is. Is despairing that God, if only I was at full strength, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but he isn't. He's kind of this is as diminished as we've ever seen Gandalf.
Yeah.
And then we get the kind of final confrontation here.
Before we get to that, I love this description. The fire in it seemed to die. So Gandalf gives this command. He's like, "You're not going to pass.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a servant of the secret fire," which we could spend an entire podcast breaking down. Gandalf like reveals himself to the Balrog. He's like, "I'm not an old man. I know I look like an old man. I am a timeless, immortal being who is a servant of God.
Yeah.
You are a shadowy flame.
Mm-hmm.
He says, the dark fire will not avail you. Like, what's a dark fire?
I don't know.
I mean, but it's so like it sounds ancient. It sounds like something that we found on a scroll written somewhere. This like ancient story. It feels old. But so he like reveals himself. He's like, I'm I'm a servant of God, and you are darkness, and I am light, and light will always overcome darkness. There's no way that you're going to defeat me.
Yeah.
And it says, the fire in it seemed to die, but the darkness grew. It stepped
Mm-hmm.
forward slowly on the bridge, and suddenly it drew itself up to a great height, and its wings were spread from wall to wall. But Gandalf could be seen, glimmering in the gloom. He seemed small and altogether alone, gray and bent like a wizened tree before the onset of a storm. The Balrog strikes at him with his fiery sword, and Glamdring responds. And he says, there was a ringing clash and a stab of white fire. The Balrog fell back and its sword flew up in molten fragments. So Glamdring like just explodes this flaming sword like a
Yeah, it
molten.
just
It's
goes
so
into
cool.
pieces.
The wizard swayed on the bridge, stepped back a pace, and then again stood still. You cannot pass, he said. With a bound, the Balrog leapt full upon the bridge. Its whip whirled and hissed. Peak Tolkien alliteration.
Yeah.
Whirling whips, glimmering glooms. Aragorn says he cannot stand alone, and he cries, Elendil, I am with you, Gandalf. Gondor, cries Boromir, and leapt after him. And this is the moment. He lifts his staff, and crying aloud, he smote the bridge before him. The staff broke asunder and fell from his hand. A blinding sheet of white light sprang up. The bridge cracked. Right at the Balrog's feet it broke, and the stone upon which it stood crashed into the gulf, while the rest remained poised, quivering like a tongue of rock thrust across the emptiness.
Mm.
And as it falls, its whip wraps itself around the wizard's knees, drags him to the brink. He staggers and falls, grasping vainly at the stone, and sliding into the abyss, he says, "Fly, you fools." And he's gone.
I think it's worth noting that Gandalf's staff breaks. The other place where a staff is broken is when Sauron's staff, I think I'm remembering right,
Yeah.
shatters,
Yeah. He says, "Your
and
staff is broken."
he's removed as the sort of first of the order.
That's right.
And so the fact that his staff breaks here, he hasn't lost his life, but it's a sign that his power, that something about his power, his being,
Yeah.
is also broken in that moment
Yeah.
of the kind of effort that he puts in.
It's an effort that like goes beyond the bounds of his own control.
Yeah,
It's like this is a final effort.
right. And then he is, he's dragged into the abyss with the Balrog, which maybe is not, predestined or whatever, but it does feel like Gandalf without his staff would be something else. And so the fact that he does go to his, into this void,
Yeah.
beneath the bridge is,
Yeah. It's true. I mean, his staff is so integral to himself.
mhm.
Like his name Gandalf literally means staff elf.
Yeah,
Like Gand means stick. It's where the
yeah,
word wand comes from.
right.
So his name, his staff is right in his name. So him without a staff.
Yeah, it's
You know.
not him anymore.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
it's so then Aragorn has to step into leadership.
Yes.
And my buddy Nick, who I mentioned earlier, wondered, in the arc of a hero's journey, you lose your kind of mentor character at some point,
Yeah.
and then have to come into your own. So I think the obvious pop culture um, moment that occurs to me is Obi-Wan
Yeah.
dies and Luke has to, go it alone.
Yeah.
So is it Aragorn who's on a hero's journey here? Is it the company? Is it us as readers, right?
Yeah.
Who, because we lose Gandalf and something really changes for a while.
Yeah.
There's like a leaderlessness, but
Yeah.
Aragorn has to say like, I'm now in charge of this
Yeah.
company.
I will follow. I will lead you now.
And
Follow
so
me.
that, I don't know. It's interesting that Aragorn immediately steps into a leadership position,
Yeah.
and
We
gets the
must
company
obey his
going.
last command. He's
Right.
like, and I think the answer to your question is, you said, is it Aragorn? Is it us? I mean, I think the answer is yes. I mean, it's,
Yeah, it's all
uh,
of that, right?
um, I read an article once where somebody pointed out that the character who most neatly maps onto Joseph Campbell's hero's journey structure is Sam.
Mm-hmm. I think that's true.
Um, he's the one who changes the most profoundly. We might say it's Frodo. There's something so holy about Frodo
Mm-hmm.
and like the transformation that he undertakes, but he doesn't ever return home
Mm-hmm.
in the same way that Sam does. Um, Aragorn is this like fated kingly creature, man, human of like great spiritual
He's going to end up
power.
the high king.
Yeah,
That's sort of inexorable.
he. So I mean, like many of the characters are kind of like elevated spiritually into a different form. I mean, Gandalf really dies here.
Yeah.
He doesn't just like become like he literally dies and he's sent back, but he truly sacrifices himself. And I don't know, it always makes me cry. Gandalf's willingness to sacrifice himself.
Mm-hmm.
But that's who Gandalf is. Gandalf here sacrifices himself for a cause greater than himself, not knowing that he's going to be able to come back.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, he has confidence, right, as this like spiritual being that he is working within his charge, his mandate, as you said. And if he dies, that eternal part of him returns to God. But as Gandalf, he loves the
Yeah.
Shire. He
Yeah.
loves Middle Earth. He loves the hobbits. He has true love for this place and this charge that he has to defend it. And so it's not like an empty sacrifice.
No.
I think it's really, and he's been hanging out for, I don't know, a couple thousand years,
Yeah.
just learning to love this place. And so,
Yeah.
um,
And he loves it
so
so much that he's willing to die to,
he's willing to die to defend it
yeah,
and, and to
to
put,
give his friends a chance.
right.
He
Exactly.
dies not even knowing that his sacrifice is going to assure victory.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Just to give them that a chance in this moment, uh, a chance for the future to continue unfolding. Because if he doesn't stand against the Balrog, they're done.
Yeah.
Um, and well, that's that narrow path again. I think
Yeah. Yeah.
um, that I have to stand in this narrow way. It's the only choice there is to make. Again, that funnel has kind of like has like
Yeah.
uh,
There's one option.
has narrowed for Gandalf, and the only person who can pass through it is him.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
just as Frodo is the only one to carry the ring.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's kind of hard to end this chapter.
Yeah. We don't want to say goodbye to Gandalf. It says, grief at last wholly overcame them, and they wept long, some standing and silent, some cast upon the ground. Well, great chapter, man.
It's good stuff.
I do want to read this one last thing as a coda.
Mm-hmm.
It says, thus at last they came beyond hope under the sky and felt the wind on their faces.
Hmm.
So much of the story is just about continuing on beyond hope
Mm-hmm.
and trusting that you'll get through, and that there's great cost, but there's something so beautiful about them coming out the darkness into the sunlight. And even though they've experienced this great loss, that was what he paid for, was for them to have a chance.
Right.
And I think that's why we read these stories, is because it gives us hope that if we're going through something hard, something that feels impossible, that all we have to do is just wake up every day and choose to continue going on,
Yeah.
and that effort won't be in vain, even if it leads to our destruction. That effort won't be in vain, because we're contributing to the ultimate fate, which is that goodness will prevail and that we'll come out on the other side.
Yeah. Yeah. That's Gandalf's act of faith um, in this moment.
Yeah.
And that he doesn't resign himself to it, but stands with such a stillness and a strength, I
Yeah.
think, is also instructive. That it's not a huge flurry of activity. It's not
No.
a big battle scene. It's him taking just a couple actions
Yeah.
in the face of this great calamity that, is set to overtake him.
Like a wizened tree set before the onset of a storm.
Yeah. Yeah. How many other storms has that, tree seen?
Yeah.
Before this big storm. So, well, we thank you for joining us for the Bridge of Khazad-dum. Next week, we will read Book 2, Chapter 6 of Fellowship of the Ring, Lothlorien. If you are enjoying the podcast, we ask you to share with a Lord of the Rings fan in your life and do all the things. If you're not following us yet, we'd love you to subscribe wherever you find the podcast, Apple Podcasts or YouTube or Spotify, etc., etc. Give us a like, a review in all those places. You can also send us an email at info@waywardwizards.com or get either Zach or I at Zach@waywardwizards or Logan at waywardwizards. We're also at waywardwizards.com. That's an easy way to share links to the show. And we just appreciate you standing with us.
Right. We'll see you next week.
See ya.